and all the things that have come out around the Diddy case are like truly awful occurrences. Like he is a bad dude. And honestly, it's a shame to have, a drug like Tusi, which generally is one that by itself isn't particularly known for making people like forget what's going on or be drawn out of it. That's something that's much more associated with things like GHB, for example, which are used kind of in much more malicious circumstances. But the fact that the headline drug in this is pink cocaine, Tusi, it's the flashiest name. It's the one that grabs the headlines and people's attention, is a little bit unfortunate. But at the same time, like drugs, like we talk about on this podcast, are tools at the end of the day. They should be treated as such. And unfortunately, there are some bad actors out there who are going to use these tools for really negative ways.
This is Modern Day Hippie. We are your homies who've done nearly every drug under the sun. Over 600 psychedelic trips and nearly every kind of bender you can possibly imagine have armed us with a universe of knowledge. I'm Yuki, and with my co-host Reggie, we talk about how we do drugs in a responsible, safe, and fun way to improve our lives. Before we dive in, and so we don't get sued, a quick legal disclaimer.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Our goal is to educate and inform others about the realities of substance use in an engaging and entertaining format. We share these experiences so you can learn from them without trying them yourself. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to attempt to recreate anything found in this episode or in any of our other content. We are not confessing to any acts stated in this podcast. The content in this episode should not be treated as factual or real in any way.
With that, we welcome you through our portal and hope you enjoy the show.
What's up, hippies? Hope you're having a vibey day so far. Reggie, it's good to see you, man. What do you got cooking for us today?
See you, Yuki. Man, so I don't know if you've been following the news lately, but it looks like Tusi and pink cocaine are everywhere right now.
Dude, I completely agree. I'm glad you brought this one up because I've seen in the last month and a half, 2 separate major celebrity instances and news articles that are pretty closely linked to pink cocaine. And as you longtime listeners of the pod know, that is definitely one of my favorite substances, something that I've had quite a few positive experiences with throughout the last year or two of my life. And it's been interesting to see it popping up so much more in the mainstream. This is a drug that's been in the main party stream, particularly in Colombia, Mexico, a few other South American, Central American countries for the last like 10, 15 years, I would say. Been around longer for that, but it's taken quite a while for it to make its way north to the US and beyond. And even nowadays, it's so hard to find in the US. The fact that it's coming up in these celebrity instances, I think signals kind of this new growth trend, this new frontier for Tusi as it becomes so much more prevalent and well known in the US. So excited to dive into these articles and chat about our thoughts about these, because there's some positive here, but there's also quite a bit of negativity associated with them. So I think that's,
and there's a lot of misinformation too. It feels like people are saying that it like originated out of Europe and stuff like that. I'm like, not quite. But yeah, let's get into it. So the first article that I came across at least was about Diddy using Tusi to, I guess, influence his victims. I could totally see how that would work. I guess just like knowing that Tusi is, just for those of you who aren't familiar, just a concoction of a few different drugs. The recipe is really dependent on who makes it, but oftentimes, and you know more about this than I do, but oftentimes it's some kind of mixture of MDMA, ketamine, maybe some psychedelics, maybe some speed, maybe some opiates. Like, it really just depends on who's making it. I don't know. What are the most common mixes you've seen, Yuki?
Yeah, the 2 most frequently cited ingredients are ketamine and MDMA. On top of that, it's really, like you said, up to the chef what goes into it. I'd say some type of methamphetamine can be pretty common to put in there, but the misnomer of pink cocaine is particularly off because there's almost never actually cocaine in it. And funny enough, the cartel has actually created Tusi so that they would have an alternative product to cocaine. Like, cocaine is already a very lucrative product for them, and they wanted to come up with something else that they could combine some of these other component drug parts together and create something that would also be a very fun product for people to take, and they also charge a decent amount of money.
It makes sense. And we have a video about the history of Tusi and pink cocaine for those of you guys who want to learn more about that. when you start thinking about these substances and you start thinking about them individually and then also how they mix, like taking a dissociative like ketamine and a psychedelic together, and especially if you're mixing that with alcohol, which oftentimes at like these Diddy things, it seems like there's alcohol involved and God knows what else. It makes a lot of sense that someone would be open to suggestion, you know?
Yeah, and something else that I read in one of the articles more recently was that several of Diddy's staff members basically came out and said that he forced them to carry drugs on them at all times, so that whether it was his like driver to his personal chef to whoever worked with him, they had to carry drugs on them at all times so that they were basically like strapped if like Diddy wanted some for himself or his guests and whatnot. And I was reading that like pink cocaine was kind of the flashiest substance that they would carry on them. But alongside with that, they would have everything from your run of the mill coke to things like GHB, which is most commonly known as kind of the main date rape drug. And when you're mixing all these drugs together, whether it's just Tusi, you know, when you're throwing in things that are even more strongly dissociative, yeah, that creates a recipe for, you know, pretty terrible things to happen. And all the things that have come out around the Diddy case are like truly awful occurrences. Like he is a bad dude. And honestly, it's a shame to have, you know, a drug like Tusi, which generally is one that by itself isn't particularly known for making people like forget what's going on or be drawn out of it. That's something that's much more associated with things like GHB, for example, which are used kind of in much more malicious circumstances. But the fact that the headline drug in this is pink cocaine, Tusi, it's the flashiest name. It's the one that grabs the headlines and people's attention, you know, is a little bit unfortunate. But at the same time, you know, like drugs, like we talk about on this podcast, are tools at the end of the day. They should be treated as such. And unfortunately, there are some bad actors out there who are going to use these tools for really negative ways. And I mean, shit, as I've started hanging out with more like, let's say like musical artists and kind of people who are, you know, pretty like high profile and well off and whatnot, I've definitely seen how drugs play into that game of, luckily I've never seen anything negative, but even just like doing the favor of offering someone like some of your drugs and using that as a way to like spark conversation or like create a relationship or just do a nice favor for someone. Like that is something that is very common and that happens. And so it's not too difficult to extrapolate from there and see how someone with really bad intentions can use that to make some truly terrible, awful things happen.
Yeah, it's fucked up, man. I hate it when people use these tools that we have like for evil. You know what I mean? Like, and you could use any tool for evil really, but like the issue with like these lesser known drugs is that like, you know, like you and I know that they have so much potential for just like creating good vibes and good memories, especially if you have like the right chef in the kitchen who's making the right kind of mixture, you know what's going into it, you know, like perfect ratio of things to put together to create a very unique and like memorable experience. Like, no, that's not how it's being presented at all. And frankly, that's probably not how most people in those scenes are like even exposed to it, which is, it sucks. Like it's our experience with Tusi, and it seems like now the mainstream media is only going to have this very negative view of it. You know, I hate it when when the, you know, like I'll call them good or bad drugs or anything like that, because it's just a tool. Like you can use it however you want to use it, or for better or for worse. But it just sucks when people take a good thing and then turn it into something like
I mean, at the same time, like what's new in terms of the public views drugs. And I think what's particularly fucked up about this occurrence is just the way these drugs were used in these really awful like sex parties and things that Diddy was doing, like things that honestly I don't even want to mention on here because they're like truly awful. But yeah, like it's one thing to have a negative perception and know that like some of these substances can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not testing them, if you're not treating them responsibly. It's a whole other level to, you know, use them to manipulate and truly cause like
evil,
physical,
man.
mental, emotional,
evil, bro.
yeah, straight up.
Like even drugs aside, just like that shit in general is just so fucked up, man.
Absolutely. Like fuck that. But anyway, I know you wanted to chat through some of the drug interactions as well associated with Tusi. I know, you know, like we mentioned, it is a mixture of different substances, and the way that those substances, those component parts can mix with other drugs can really cause, you know, some some problems, some dangers, some cautions
Yeah,
that I
definitely.
think like we all need to stay aware of and be vigilant about.
And actually, before we get into that, I did want to touch on the other big news involving Tusi, Liam Payne situation. Rest in peace. It's really unfortunate what happened with him. My understanding, just from what I've read, it seems like he was on some combination of drugs, including kitchen sink Tusi. It seems like he somehow fell off of his balcony or jumped off of his balcony or something. I don't know if they actually know what happened. It seems like he fell off his balcony and unfortunately passed away. But that incident actually is kind of what got me to start looking into a lot of the drug interactions, because like you are mixing drugs and it can be dangerous. A lot of people need to understand that if you're going to be doing a drug like 2C, which is already a combination of drugs, you got to be extra careful when you're mixing it with other things, especially like alcohol, or if you're doing any other drugs on the side. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, and one more thing I wanted to mention real quick as well was, I know in like Liam Payne's autopsy, pink cocaine was just one of the things they found. There are some other substances in there as well. And because, as I mentioned, common component parts in 2C are ketamine, which is a depressant, MDMA, and sometimes, amphetamines, which are, uppers, and then sometimes a psychedelic, which is its own category. So it's like those things separately can be really fun together. And honestly, is what makes it one of my favorite substances. But that also means that they can have negative interactions with so many different things, because it's like you're already on multiple things at once. And then also real quick, I actually had no idea who Liam Payne was. I had to look it up. He was a member of One Direction, the like massive boy band from, I don't know what, like 10 years ago. So like super, super famous, but yeah, super sad what happened to him, and rest in peace indeed.
Rest in peace, man. Damn. My heart goes out to all the One Direction fans out there, and to, of course, Liam's family and everything. It's, no one wants to see those things happen. But for your safety, let's go over some of these drug interactions. Okay. So the major interactions with some of the substances that people often take, they're taking 2C, or some of the substances within 2C that you got to look out for, are alcohol and ketamine. So it typically has ketamine in it. It's a dissociative. It makes you kind of slow, dizzy. It's kind of sedative. If you're mixing that with alcohol, which is already a sedative, it can lead to respiratory depression. It could lead to just you being kind of more slow and fucked up than you want. And if it kind of slows your breathing enough, then that can just get really dangerous to where you're not getting the oxygen you need. You can like kind of die without meaning to, almost, especially if like you're not with someone or no one's looking out for you or anything like that. So, like UK and I don't drink, and we're big fans of not drinking on this channel. I think like alcohol is like kind of a stupid drug for the most part. I know it has its place and everything, but if you're gonna be doing something like 2C, just don't drink. Like, it's really not worth it. I don't know your thoughts, Yuki, but I don't think it's worth it to be drinking when you're doing something like 2C. It also kind of, in my opinion, takes away from some of the effects, the other drugs that you're taking. So
it honestly depends. I will say the first time I ever did 2C, I was lucky that it was really good fucking 2C, and I was also pretty drunk, and that was one of the most fucked up fun nights of my life. Not one I would want to recreate, and honestly, it was a lot, and that was something that happened at this point several years ago when I was younger, and just I think like, my body was capable of a little bit more. But it also depends on the 2C, the ratio of the ketamine in it. And that, unfortunately, is something that you can't even test for. Like all the reagent tests that you or I have access to, those only tell you the presence of a substance. They don't tell you the quantity, and you really have to know the ratio. And so like the ratio of the batch that I created is heavier on the ketamine side. And so that's something that I would absolutely not mix with alcohol. And that just goes for alcohol and K in general. Like that is a super, super dangerous combination. Like do not mix those two things. And agreed, like if you're doing 2C, like honestly, that's all you should need to ride out and have a great time.
Yeah.
Like whenever I give 2C or even K to like people who haven't tried 2C before, or if I'm just sharing some K at an event, I'll make sure they're not like super drunk or that they haven't had a drink in a while. Cause yeah, man, those two just compound on each other like exponentially and can be super dangerous. And that actually reminds me that earlier this year, there was another celebrity who drowned in his own pool. I don't remember who it was, while he was on a good bit of ketamine. And I don't recall if there was alcohol involved there as well, but you can see how just ketamine by itself, if you do enough, like you'll be so dissociated that you can just like fall into a pool of water and like not realize where you are and just drown. And combine that with alcohol where like if you're too drunk, that can also happen. Like, come on, that's just That's just a bad formula. That's a bad time.
And obviously, like, we can't control what y'all do. And like, you know, we're all humans. Like, Key and I have both done ketamine while drinking and, you know, 2C while drinking, like when we used to drink. But like, I'll just say this, like, if you are going to do it, just have a friend there with you, you know, like just some kind of person that, you know, you guys can look out for each other. Like, the last thing you want is just like someone to like find you dead or something like that. Right. So as long as you're with people, hopefully they can kind of carry you, take care of them, and then have less to worry about, you know. Plus, I personally think that these kinds of drugs are a lot more fun in social settings with other people anyways. So like, you know, don't be doing drugs by yourself like that.
Yeah, amen to that, brother.
All right. The other major interaction to look out for is meth and coke. Oh, if your pink cocaine does have cocaine in it, and it also has meth in it or any kind of amphetamine, really, they're two stimulants, two uppers. That's going to kind of fuck up your heart rate a little bit. You know, some people are more susceptible to others for that kind of thing, but it is a major interaction. And especially if you're doing it often, that's something you kind of just don't want to be dealing with too much. Something to just be careful about, kind of look out for that. Especially if you're predisposed to any kind of cardiovascular thing.
Yeah, man. And even if like the pink cocaine very commonly does not have any coke in it, it may have some sort of methamphetamine in it. But even without that, like the MDMA alone is like enough of an upper to me to where it's like, I've never had the desire to do coke alongside Tusi as well. And like this reminds me and brings me back to the handful of times I had years ago when I did too much coke and I could just feel my body sweating and shaking and my heart just like racing in a really uncomfortable way. And I mean, yeah, you combine that feeling with, you know, on 2C, you're doing potentially some methamphetamine to get the MDMA. Again, like not a good time.
Yeah.
If you're in that situation where it's like, and look, dude, I get it. Like you're at a party, you want to snort more stuff. Like I've been there. I get it. In those situations, I think it's better to just do a little bit more of the 2C than to add in this additional, totally new variable of the cocaine itself to stack on top.
Also, book is kind of mid, I feel like, compared to 2C. So like, if you're going to be snorting and like putting volume through your nose, like, you know, might as well do something that already know is going to be good.
Yeah. And look, at the end of the day, like we won't judge. Like everyone has their preferences and their vices, but kind of we've taken it upon ourselves to identify what we feel like are the highest vibes drugs. And if you want to get a sense of that, check out our drug tier list video as well, which we just published.
Yeah, we talk about all of these drugs in there. And you know, we're talking from our own experiences as well. So like, trust us. We don't like Yuki said, we really don't judge. Like we get it. We've been there. But you know, you can learn from some of the things that we've experienced so that you don't have to experience some of the negative things that we did. Like you don't want to be up all night after a game of Snowpoly.
Oh, dude, I wish I could impart to people the way that I felt after that. Like after like a raging night of doing cocaine and literally the sun has risen. It's like 9 or 10 a.m. and my heart is still beating so much, so fast and uncomfortably. And I'm just like laying in bed, trying to fall asleep. And literally, I promised myself, I was like, if I wake up from this and I make it through this like safely, I'm never doing this much coke ever again. And that experience was so negative that since then I've barely touched cocaine, like barely. And it's kind of turned me off of it. And honestly, in a way, I'm like grateful that I had that extremely negative experience because it really like got me off of doing coke pretty early on. Like my coke phase was very short. Like it burned really hot and very briefly. But again, that's also one of those drugs where it's like the more you do it, the more your brain chemistry literally changes to depend on it. Like it's one of the very few drugs where you can become so chemically dependent on it that it will change the way your brain works. And that's not chill.
That's not what drugs are for. What? We don't want that. All right. The next major interaction to look out for when you're doing 2C is mixture of ketamine and opiates. I don't know, Yuki, if like the recipes that you've tried or seen, but from what I've researched, it seems like people are starting to put opiates in 2C. I didn't realize that was a thing personally.
No, I didn't either, honestly. That's kind of strange, but at the same time, it's like, I think people who make 2C without the best intentions or they're not like proud of their product, they'll literally throw in like whatever the fuck they have.
Yeah, that's what it seems like, dude. It's super fucked. So like, know what you're getting, dude. Know what you're taking if you can, because I don't fucking want opiates in my 2C, bro. Like, that's not what I signed up for. Like, but yeah, ketamine and opiates, you can imagine how those would also lead to a pretty bad mix. A dangerous mix rather. You just don't want to be dealing with that. Onto the more moderate interactions that aren't like quote unquote major interactions. There's ketamine and coke, then ketamine and meth or amphetamines. Both of those are similar in that you're mixing like a dissociative like ketamine with like an upper. And, the interaction's not as crazy, but it still can increase your blood pressure and heart rate. And if you have like a history of like heart disease or something, that can be dangerous. So just something to keep in mind. And on the moderate list, lastly, there's opiates and alcohol. Everyone kind of knows about that one. Like anytime anyone's been prescribed opiates by a doctor for pain or a surgery or something, like they say, don't drink. That one's kind of obvious. Hopefully you're not doing any 2C with opiates in it. But if you are for some reason, it's just be careful.
Yeah, man. And I think there's definitely something to be said there for the interactions of like the contrasting of an upper and a downer. And there was actually one of my last few sessions of doing 2C like a couple of weeks ago. I was just having like kind of a weird night. Like the 2C wasn't making me feel great. And what I realized that night in particular was the polarities of the ketamine and the MDMA. Like the ketamine was just like bringing me down, like maybe just want to sit down and vibe and like just be in a listening mood and listening to my friends and stuff. And then the MDMA like really made me want to be like uppity and moving around. And usually I feel like my brain can pick one of those to optimize for, so to speak, depending on the situation that I'm in, or I can pretty seamlessly switch between these two different settings, like a really active state and then a resting state, every 15, 30 minutes. But for whatever reason on this specific night, like I was just really tired from beforehand and I was so lethargic and just like sitting on the couch the whole time. But also it's like my body wanted to move and I was like I was actually like jittery. And it wasn't super comfortable, man. And that was in this 2C alone. It's the same batch I always take. And literally, 9 times out of 10, it's a great time. I have no issues with it. But for whatever reason on this night, I could really feel these like two opposing forces. And they just built up a lot of anxiety and honestly like some negativity in me for the remainder of that night. And I didn't enjoy that. It wasn't great. I kind of made like a mental note to myself after that to kind of watch out for that feeling and really like watch out for my dosage a little bit. Cause that night my dosing was kind of weird. It was just like different than how I usually dose it and how I usually pace myself through the night. So I can totally see how interactions of, like Calvin Kleining, for example, that's honestly not something I have too much experience with. I would say the one or two times that I tried it, I felt like they almost canceled each other out. And I was like,
hold on, back up. Calvin Kleining? What? What is that?
You've never heard of that?
I've never heard of Calvin Kleining.
Oh, it's C and K, Calvin Klein.
What?
C and K.
Oh, okay.
And Calvin Klein.
Nice. That's kind of what I figured it was, but damn,
yeah,
that's an interesting one.
Dude, and I have friends who like swear by that, and I haven't dabbled much, but I feel like they just kind of cancel each other out. I'm like, this is just
when you experienced this, were you just on the 2C, like the one that you
I was
used
just 2C. It was just my usual batch, the ketamine, the MDMA, the bit of LSD. But I could really feel in that instance, I think, because I came into the night just more physically tired than usual. And I started with a pretty big dose. And because the issue with starting with a big dose is even as you like re-up with smaller doses throughout, you start at like a high and then comparatively the way you feel the rest of the night, even as you're re-upping with smaller doses, is lower than when you started. And like, especially that starting point, I think gave a lot of accumulated kind of like MDMA in my system. And so even though I was re-upping, like I was still kind of like writing that down and it gave me more jitters than usual. And then just the ketamine, like paired with my tiredness was like, I was kind of just like zonked out on the couch the entire time. Like my friends were like just chatting around me and like, I wanted to interact. I wanted to do things, but I just like, I felt like I couldn't get up. Like I was just too tired.
Maybe we should do an episode on how to dose drugs, like spacing wise and like volume wise and everything. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, agreed.
Man, that's interesting. I guess like to close us off, what would you recommend as someone who's done a lot more 2C than me? What would you recommend someone put in 2C if they're making their own batch? What would you recommend people leave out? Because I think that's just as important.
Yeah, I mean, my go-to is ketamine and DMA. Figure out a ratio that you like. So I like it a little bit heavier on the ketamine side. So 60% K, 40% M. And then a few drops of LSD in there because it gives you some nice, like super light visuals. You don't feel like you're tripping necessarily, but it gives you some nice visual effects. And I would honestly keep it to that. Like anything else you add in there is just, it's like more risk. It's things that aren't quite contributing to the experience. And they say like there's beauty in simplicity. And even though Tusi is by definition not a simple drug, because it is literally a combination or a cocktail. If you keep it simple, it's great. And like most of the nights that I am doing Tusi, I am only doing Tusi, or the only thing I'm usually pairing it with is maybe a little bit of extra ketamine.
Fair. You heard it here first, guys.
Yeah. And like we mentioned on the episode, like this one was definitely a little bit more safety oriented than usual, but this is a really important reminder, something that's good for us to remind ourselves as well as, regular recreational drug users, and for us to keep top of mind. And, we see it out in pop culture. These things are going to continue to get more and more common as I think Western society continues to open its mind around drugs, as more people become familiar with Tusi and pink cocaine, making sure that people are doing it safely and an educated way. And like at the end of the day, most times when we're doing this stuff, we're doing it to have fun. And you can't have fun if you're overdoing it or you're putting yourself in danger. So, yeah, just word of advice. And the times I've had where I've known I have overdone things, that was a really good just mental checkpoint with myself where I'm like, dude, let me not do this again. And the beautiful thing is, most of the time you will probably come out of it okay, but like hold on to that feeling, hold on to that learning and that experience so that you can learn from it and make sure you don't put yourself in that position again.
And still test your drugs because it sounds like people are putting fentanyl and shit in this stuff now. And you won't have it next time if you get caught up in the wrong shit by accident. So just test your drugs, safety 101. And
yeah. And fentanyl test strips are like $1 each on Dan Safe. So check those out. Actually, I need to restock on mine. I'm almost out.
Yeah, we have a link in the description for that too. So like if you don't even know where to get some, like we got you.
Yeah, it's good shit. Highly recommend.
That's today's pod. Be safe and happy tripping, y'all.
You've been listening to Modern Day Hippie. As you exit the portal, we have just one small ask of you. If you learned something new today, had a laugh, or resurfaced a drug story of your own, we want to hear about it. Drop us a comment on YouTube and show us some love on your favorite podcasting platforms. Internet algorithms really dog on us because of the topics that we discuss, so your support goes even further here than you might think. We'll catch you next week.